And here's the story of what's unfolding right now in Iran, where the scale of public unrest, government violence, and international pressure is reshaping the geopolitical landscape. For weeks now, Iranians from all walks of life have taken to the streets in cities across the country, challenging their government and demanding change. What began as protests sparked by soaring inflation, a collapsing economy, and rising prices has transformed into one of the broadest uprisings seen in Iran in years, with demonstrators calling for fundamental reforms and even an end to nearly half a century of clerical rule under the Islamic Republic. CD Newsroom. Com+1. The Iranian government's response has been harsh and unforgiving. Security forces have used live ammunition, tear gas, and mass arrests to suppress the demonstrations, and human rights groups say the death toll is mounting rapidly. Independent monitors have reported that well over 500 people, predominantly protesters, have been killed in clashes with security forces, and many more have been detained. These figures are difficult to verify due to an extensive internet blackout imposed by Tehran, which has made independent reporting inside the country extremely challenging. The Wall Street Journal +1 within Iran state media paints a very different picture. Officials label the protests as acts of terrorism and accuse foreign enemies of stoking unrest. Hardline voices in the government have even declared that anyone aiding the demonstrations could be considered an enemy of God, a charge that carries the potential for the death penalty under Iranian law. This escalation in rhetoric signals a dramatic shift from crowd control to a much more severe crackdown on dissent. New York Post. Amid this internal upheaval, the United States has become publicly involved, raising the stakes even higher. The U.S. president has repeatedly condemned Iran's violent suppression of peaceful demonstrators, saying that the killing of protesters crosses a red line, and that Washington is locked and loaded and ready to help if the violence continues. U.S. officials are reportedly considering a broad range of responses, from new sanctions and cyber operations designed to disrupt Tehran's ability to limit communications, to possible military action aimed at pressuring the Iranian government. Reuters +1. This potential for military action is not a casual suggestion, but something being seriously evaluated at the highest levels of the U.S. government. According to multiple officials familiar with the discussions, the Pentagon has been asked to develop military options that could include strikes on specific targets in Iran to demonstrate U.S. resolve and potentially degrade the regime's capabilities to suppress its people. These discussions are ongoing, and no final decision has been made, but the fact that such options are being considered at all highlights the severity of the crisis. Axios +1. At the same time, the U.S. is not solely focused on military means. Diplomats in Washington have indicated that other tools remain on the table, including bolstering technological support to Iranian activists to counter the internet blackout, and imposing further economic sanctions aimed at weakening the regime's financial base. The goal in these approaches is to empower the protest movement and create pressure on the government from multiple angles without immediately resorting to armed conflict. The Sunday Guardian. Iran's leaders have responded defiantly to the prospect of American intervention. Senior officials in Tehran have issued stern warnings that any U.S. military action would be met with retaliation not only against U.S. forces but also against American allies and shipping lanes throughout the Middle East. The Speaker of the Iranian Parliament has publicly stated that U.S. military bases and assets in the region would be considered legitimate targets if Washington strikes Iranian territory. This rhetoric underscores the very real risk of escalation that could draw numerous countries into a wider confrontation. The National +1. The situation is made murkier by Tehran's own narrative about the unrest. While protesters demand freedom and economic justice, the government insists that external enemies, including the United States and Israel, are exploiting the turmoil to destabilize the nation. Iranian officials claim without independent evidence that foreign, trained militants have been smuggled into the country to provoke chaos. These statements seem intended to rally nationalist sentiment and justify the government's heavy-handed tactics. CD Newsroom. Calm. For ordinary Iranians on the ground, the human cost of this crisis has been devastating. Videos verified by international media and eyewitness accounts show security forces firing on crowds, and hospitals overwhelmed with the injured and dead. In cities from Tehran to the provinces, people continue to march, chant, and resist despite the dangers. Some protesters carry slogans that once focused on economic hardship, but now call for systemic political change. reflecting a shift from discontent to outright rejection of the existing power structure. CD Newsroom. Calm regional responses have also begun to take shape. Israel has publicly stated it is closely monitoring the unrest and supports the aspirations of the Iranian people from afar. Other neighboring states, wary of further destabilization, are likely evaluating their own security postures as the situation unfolds. Within the United Nations and other international forums, calls for restraint and respect for human rights have been voiced, but there is also a recognition that global powers are deeply divided on how best to respond. The national analysts warn that an EU's military action, even if limited, could have unpredictable consequences. Military intervention in the Middle East has historically carried significant risks, and some experts caution that striking Iran could solidify domestic support for the regime by allowing it to frame the crisis as resistance to foreign aggression. Others argue that decisive action might protect civilians and weaken the government's ability to suppress its population. The debate over these approaches reflects broader tensions in U.S. foreign policy between humanitarian concerns and strategic caution. Read as this crisis continues, the world watches closely. In Iran, the people's courage in the face of profound danger has drawn global sympathy, even as the cost in lives and freedoms rises. Abroad, governments are calculating the implications of their responses, weighing alliances, regional stability, and the risks of escalation. The situation remains fluid, and each new development, whether an increase in protests, a shift in U.S. policy, or a sharper threat from Tehran, has the potential to change the trajectory of this conflict. Al Jazeera. What is clear, however, is that the Iran protests have become much more than a domestic upheaval. They are now a flashpoint in the ongoing struggle between authoritarian governance and popular demands for freedom, and their outcome will likely reverberate far beyond Iran's borders. As the world waits to see whether diplomatic pressure, economic measures, or military options will prevail, the voices of Iranian protesters continue to echo through the streets, demanding dignity, justice, and a future free from fear. The Guardian.